Welcome to another online lecture by Mr. Regas. Today we're going to look at the United Nations. Now, maybe you can pick out which the United Nations building is in this photo, but the UN is one of our best examples of internationalism. Almost every country in the world belongs to the UN, and here we see a forum for trying to settle disputes and work together on a huge global stage. Now, the UN is not without criticisms, and we will look at that as well. In this lecture, we're going to focus mainly on what the UN is and what it can do. So this is the UN building here in New York City. So what is the UN? The UN is an international organization founded following World War II in 1945. So we would call the UN a supranational organization, meaning that for it to work, countries have to agree to go along with the decisions. The main goal of it is to provide a forum for international conflicts to be resolved peacefully. So you could think of it as a little bit like an international government. Currently, there are 193 member states. There's also two official observers. This is Palestine and the Holy See, or Vatican. Now, the mission and work of the UN is guided by a founding charter, so similar to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms of Canada. The UN is currently led by the Secretary General, who acts as the Chief Administrative Officer. Today, the Secretary General is Antonio Guterres. He's from Portugal. He became the ninth Secretary General on January 1st, 2017. So this map shows us who is a part of the UN. As you can see, it is overwhelmingly the entire world. So how was it created? Well, the term United Nations was used by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on January 1st, 1942, so during World War II. This is when 26 nations joined together to pledge their commitment to defeating the Axis powers. October 24th, 1945, the UN comes into existence. So this is really just a matter of weeks after the surrender of Japan in World War II. So 50 nations originally met and drew up the United Nations Charter in San Francisco. Charter was signed on June 26, 1945, and consisted of 51 nations. Today, October 24th is known as United Nations Day. So where is it based out of? So the UN headquarters are in New York City. Here's a picture of the building and then inside of the General Assembly. What do they do? Well, the UN has 5 main objectives: maintain international peace and security, protect human rights, deliver humanitarian aid, promote sustainable development, and uphold international law. Some of these objectives will get into greater detail in later lessons, partially because the United Nations has many different branches. So the UN also has different branches such as UNESCO or the World Health Organization or the World Food Program or UNICEF. So there's many different branches that work from the UN. There's also 6 main organs of the United Nations. We're going to look specifically at the 3 that are bolded here, but the 6 are the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trustee Council, the International Court of Justice, and the UN Secretariat. So the General Assembly. This is the only organ in the United Nations in which all 193 member nations have equal representation. So every country is represented in the General Assembly, and every country would get 1 vote. The powers in the United Nations General Assembly include overseeing the budget of the United Nations, or appointing non-permanent members of the Security Council, receiving reports from other parts of the UN, and making recommendations in the form of resolutions. This is the main deliberative and policy-making organ of the United Nations. They meet annually at the headquarters in New York City, and the Secretary General leads the meeting. These meetings last from September to December, resume again in January until all unresolved issues are addressed. Sometimes the General Assembly is also reconvened in cases of emergencies. The members vote on recommendations on peace and security, so these then go to the Security Council. They vote on budgetary concerns, and then the election, admission, suspension, or expulsion of members by a two-thirds majority. The next organ is the Security Council. Their primary responsibility is for maintaining international peace and security. So they meet whenever peace is threatened. Remember, the UN was created after World War II. So one of the goals is preventing another world war. While there are lots of criticisms of the UN, one thing that we can say, though, is that there has not been a World War III. All members of the UN agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council. And only the Security Council has the power to make decisions on peace and security issues. So what we can see right off the bat is that the Security Council has the most power out of any of the organs. And we'll see that this power is not at all balanced. So when an issue which threatens peace is brought to the Security Council, the initial recommendation is that sides try to meet and reach a peaceful resolution. So they may set forth principles for such an agreement. They may begin an investigation and mediation. In some cases, they might dispatch a mission or appoint special envoys. They also might request the Secretary General to use his influence to peacefully settle the dispute. So there are different methods that they use. When a dispute leads to hostilities, the Council's primary concern is to bring them to an end as soon as possible. So if this is the case, the Council may do things like issue ceasefire directives that can help prevent an escalation of the conflict. So think back to our motives of internationalism, promoting peace and security. They also might dispatch military observers or a peacekeeping force to help reduce tensions, separate opposing forces, and establish a calm in which a peaceful settlement may be sought. Remember, though, these powers only belong to the Security Council. This is not something the General Assembly votes on. They also may opt for enforcement measures. This can include economic sanctions, arms embargoes, financial penalties and restrictions, and even travel bans. Now, an arms embargo, this is when a country cannot purchase weaponry. Or an economic sanction would be trying to force a country to do something by damaging their economy, such as saying no country is allowed to trade with you. You also might see the severance of diplomatic relations, a blockade, or collective military actions. So the Security Council is made up of 15 members at all times. There's 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent members. Let's look at the 5 permanent members first. So these have been the permanent members since 1945. China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Now you should be able to look at this and kind of figure out why these are the 5. At the end of World War II, these were the 5, let's say, winning nations and somewhat more powerful. They all were part of the Allies, yet today they do not necessarily see eye to eye on everything. The 10 non-permanent members are elected to 2-year terms. The current list includes Belgium, the Dominican Republic, Estonia, Germany, Indonesia, Niger, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, South Africa, Tunisia, and Vietnam. Each member of the Security Council has 1 vote, and so all decisions of the Security Council must be approved by 9 affirmative votes. However, the 5 permanent members must all vote yes. And this is where we start to see the power of the Security Council come into play, and also one of the things that can lead to it being ineffective. Each one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council have the right to veto a decision. All 5 permanent members have used their veto at some point. And the reason a veto is so powerful is because if a nation does not fully agree to a decision made by the council and they veto something, it automatically is dead. If one of the 5 permanent Security Council members vetoes something that's been brought to them, it doesn't matter if the other 14 members want it, it is dead. Now, if a nation doesn't agree with a decision made by the council, they may abstain from voting and let the motion pass as long as the other 9 nations vote in favor. Here's the 4 most recent votes or vetoes from the Security Council. So we have Russia and China vetoing on 20th of December 2019. This has to do with different obligations to Syria. Russia and China also in September of 2019 to do with the conflict in Syria. Russia and China, 28th of February 2019, the situation in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And then the United States, June 2018. This was regarding the Middle East situation, including the Palestinian question. So what we see here is each one of these Security Council members, they have different motivations. They have different things that are on their agenda, and the veto is a way that they use this. Our last organ of the UN we're going to look at is the ICJ, or the International Court of Justice. It's also known as the World Court or The Hague. Now, the reason it's known as The Hague is because that's where it's located, in the city of The Hague, Netherlands. The objective of the ICJ is to settle legal disputes submitted to it by states and provides advisory opinions on legal questions submitted by other branches of the UN. Now, one thing I'll say right off the bat, just to try to clear up some of the confusion, the International Court of Justice does not charge war criminals. This is something that the International Criminal Court does, or the ICC. The ICC is not a branch of the United Nations. We will look at them in greater detail. But the ICJ is a branch of the UN. So the ICJ is made up of 15 judges elected to serve 9-year terms. All judges must be elected by the General Assembly and the Security Council. No 2 judges may be from the same country, and there's an understanding that seats will be distributed by geographic region. 5 seats belonging to Western, 3 belonging to African countries, 2 to Eastern European, 3 to Asian states, and 2 from Latin American or Caribbean states. So for most of the court's history, seats have been held by each permanent state on the Security Council. Here's a list of the current countries holding seats. So France, Somalia, Japan, Slovakia, Morocco, Brazil, United Kingdom, China, USA, Italy, Uganda, India, Australia, Russia, Jamaica, and Lebanon. So this is the United Nations. Again, they have 6 main organs. We looked at the General Assembly, where every country is represented equally and has 1 vote. We looked at the Security Council, who gets to make decisions regarding things like peacekeeping missions or economic sanctions. There's 15 members there, 5 of which are permanent, the permanent members having a veto, and then the International Court of Justice. So this is the makeup of the UN. This is essentially what it does. In our next lecture, we're going to look at the criticisms of it. Thank you for listening.